Welcome everyone to the must-know NPSP configuration and automation. Thank you for joining the session today, and I want to just quickly thank the sponsors for obviously sponsoring the event. So a little bit about me. My name is Mitchell Swailes. I am the Chief Solution Engineer at Uniborough. I'm 7-time Salesforce certified, something I always like to plug in there. I am the community leader of the Montreal nonprofit group. I'm also a trailhead ranger, and probably most importantly, I am a Disney connoisseur. So if any questions, whether it's Disney related, Salesforce related, I probably have an answer of some sort for all of those questions. A little bit about Uniborough. We are a small business located in Montreal, Canada, and we primarily focus on nonprofits and foundations. And that's because our mission is to level the tech playing field. So we basically believe that no matter how big or how small you are, you deserve the best tools as well as expertise. And that's why we like Salesforce so much. And that's because they give 10 licenses for free to nonprofits as well as foundations. So today we're going to be talking about a nonprofit that I made up called The Club. And so a little bit about The Club. They are a community center, and they do donations. They have a shelter. They have a food bank. So they have a lot of different areas that they focus on, and they have an existing Salesforce org already. And so this Salesforce org was created by volunteers as well as a Salesforce partner who maybe did not know NPSP too well. And so this has caused the club to have some challenges leveraging NPSP. And so the issue that we see a lot is that people try to customize their Salesforce so much. They want to add all these different add-ons, all these different things in. And so once that happens, when you get down the line, it leads to many different issues. And so overcomplicating Salesforce is definitely a thing that we don't want to be doing. And that's unfortunately what has happened to the club. And so what we're going to be looking at today is how we can help the club kind of grow out of all of this customizations, all of these little nuances that are all these little custom things that were put in place, and try to get down almost down to the basics, back to standard. And so that leads us into what I like to call the guiding principles, which is standard, simple, as well as convenient. We want to keep things as simple and as standard as we can, so we can lead to less issues down the road. Just use exactly what we need and not anything extra. Almost like a minimal viable solution, just enough to get what we need to do. And we want things to be convenient because we don't want Salesforce to be hard. We don't want to spend extra time on Salesforce. We want to be focusing more on our mission. We want Salesforce to help with our mission and not just hunker us down and spend all this time trying to figure out all these little things. So how are we going to do that? So keeping up with that guiding principles, we're going to talk about standardizing things such as our household naming conventions, as well as our opportunity naming conventions. We're going to talk about keeping things simple, which maybe includes address management. Do we need automatic addresses to be created? As well as automatic payment creation. Do we need these kinds of things? And then lastly, how can we make things convenient and easy? And for that, we're going to be talking about customizable rollups, enhanced recurring donations, as well as the gift entries. So all in all, we want to take back time that we've lost trying to focus directly on Salesforce. Instead, we're going to try to leverage Salesforce and take back that time. So most of the problems from the club can be solved fairly simply using the NPSP settings. So the NPSP settings is very simple to get to. All we need to do is just open our app launcher and then search for NPSP settings. I just search for NPSP because it's a little bit quicker for me. And then I go ahead and click on NPSP settings. This will open up a nice little page. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, maybe about 10 seconds just for it to load up. But once we're there, we get greeted with all of these lovely different menu options. And a lot of what we're going to be doing today is going to be focusing on these different menu items. And so the first one is the household naming conventions. So we're going to talk about standardization. So at the club, they've noticed that they have a lot of accounts that look like duplicates, and more specifically, household accounts. So natively in NPSP, the household naming convention is last name followed by household. So for example, my household name would be the Swailes household. So in Canada, Swailes is a little bit of a more unique thing. I know it's actually an English last name, so maybe a little bit more common in London. But for names such as like Smith or for White, a little bit more common, you can see how we can have multiple households with the same name. So at the club, they have a Bill Smith, they have a George Smith, as well as a Harry Smith. Each of these households are just Smith household, which is very confusing, especially when you're working in there and you want to get to Bill's specific household. But how do you know it's Bill's household if it's just Smith household? So you can already see where the confusion lies. So a very simple fix for this is going into our NPSP settings, going into our household naming convention and changing it from just the last name to the first last name, as well as that household tag. So now we went from just Smith to Bill Smith household, George Smith household, Harry Smith household. So now it's a lot easier to identify and get that data that we need without actually having to now click into the record. So not only are we saving time on not clicking in, but now we can easily gather data just by looking at it. So on that topic of keeping things standard and naming conventions, we're going to talk about opportunity naming conventions. So just like with the households, we can automatically name opportunity records as they come in. And so what's really cool with the NPSP is that each record type can have its own naming convention. So if you have a different naming convention for donations versus in-kind donations versus grants, you can actually set different naming conventions for each one. But for the club's case, we just gave them all record types the same name, or the same naming convention rather. And so for them, what we did was we put the contact name or the the contact name or the organization name, followed by the amount, then the record type, the close date, and the campaign. So now all of the kind of the meat and potatoes of the data that we want is available right there in that name. So at a quick glance, you can see, oh, I know that Bill Smith donated $10 on this day, and it was for this campaign. So now all that information is right there without having to click in to each individual record. Another thing that we like to do, just as a little bit extra, is assign something we like to call an opportunity number. And so this is just a simple auto number that you can put on the opportunity that will iterate every time a new opportunity is created. So this is super useful for searching purposes. So for example, going back to that Bill Smith donation, let's say we have that auto number. So Bill Smith's number would be, let's say, 1644. Now I'm telling one of my colleagues, hey, have you checked out Bill Smith's donation from last February? Instead of my coworker having to go in and write like Bill Smith, $10 donation from February, and then kind of going through and hoping that there's only one. If I tell her the opportunity number instead, if I say, oh, if you check Bill's donation 1644, she can just search for 1644, and that opportunity will come up almost right away without having to actually kind of go through and find the right one. So those are just really easy ways to standardize our naming conventions. But now that we've actually named everything or have the naming process in place, how do we actually go ahead and kind of implement those changes? So for future donations and future households, the naming convention will kick in right away, but that's fine. But it's the stuff that happened already, the existing data, how do we update it? Well, there's actually a button on both the household as well as the opportunity to actually refresh the name. And so you can do that, but if you have hundreds or thousands of donations and thousands of households, going through each individual record and clicking the refresh name button might, it's probably not the best thing you want to be spending your time with. So there is something called the bulk data process, And this lets us refresh all of our names almost instantly. So this is an irreversible process. This is something to keep in mind. Once we refresh those names, there is no turning back. But this lets us refresh those names without having to go in and do them individually. And that way, all of our households, all our opportunities will be standardized instantly. So next up, we're going to talk about how do we keep things simple? How can we make sure we don't overcomplicate our sales force? And so we're going to talk about the address management. Address management, super useful in NPSP. It lets us track all of the different addresses that a contact or household have. And then it also, which I think is the coolest part, is when you update an address on a contact, it automatically updates all of the addresses for all the contacts in that household. So this is super convenient when you have, let's say, children, or if you're working a shelter, or if you just need to track people's addresses over time. And that's exactly what the club does. Because they have their shelter, it's super important for them to know who is living where at what point in time and where were they living in the past. But now they notice that they have a lot of like duplicate addresses. And so here's a quick little screenshot where you can see that the addresses for one of this accounts is very similar, but they're a little bit different. So just by like capitalizing or adding a space or adding an apartment number, it creates a new record. And so this can get really messy really quickly. And that's what the club has noticed in their Salesforce. And so what we recommend to do is actually disable the automatic household creation, household address creation. So this means that when we make changes now, it won't create new records for us every single time. But the good thing is we can actually still use the address management. It just won't be done automatically for us. So this means that the club can still keep track of where everybody's living. They just won't get that benefit of having those automated creations every time we change the address. So this not only cleans up their Salesforce just a little bit, but it'll also be able to save them time from actually having to go through and cleaning them up. So speaking of trying to keep things clean, we're going to talk about the payments. So the club has payment creation enabled in their Salesforce, but they're not using it. So the thing with payments is that when we have payment creation turned on, for every opportunity record, we'll have at least one payment record. So just like the addresses, this can add up very quickly. If you have thousands of donations, well, you just have yourself another 1,000 payments. So if you're not using payments correctly, or if you're not really, if you're not leveraging it, then there's no point in having it turned on. So for our case, we went ahead and turned the automatic payment creation off for the club. But something I would like to point out is that you can only have payments turned on for certain record types. And this might be useful for some nonprofits out there. Just as an example, for grants or major gifts, if someone, let's say, gives you $1 million but pays it out in 4 payments, that's a great time to use the payment object. But for our case at the club, they don't need it, so we went ahead and turned it off. So now, how can we make things convenient? We standardize a bunch of things. We've turned off some stuff to clean up the org, make it a little bit easier. But now how can we actually make things convenient and make things easy for the people at the club? Well, the club right now, when they're doing some reporting, they need 2 primary things. They need to know how many times people have donated throughout the years, almost like a donor streak. And they need to know the total amount of gifts that someone or a household has donated within the last 5 years. And so to do that, we're going to be using an NPSP native feature called Customizable Rollups. And customizable rollups I think are really cool because it adds rollups to things that won't normally have rollups. So this takes data from your opportunities and your payments and rolls them up to either our accounts, our contacts, our general accounting units, as well as our recurring donations. And so there are 87 of these rollups out of the box, just right off the bat. And those include things such as total gifts this year, total gifts last year, the number of gifts this year, your average gift, your first gift date, their last gift date, and I can go on to name all 87 of them. But this can get a little bit confusing if there's a lot of them, right? And so do we necessarily need them all? Probably not. What we really want to do is focus on the ones that matter. And the ones that matter for the club are the years donated as well as the total gifts the last 5 years. But the problem is that these don't exist natively. These aren't part of the 87 that exist. So what can we do for the club in order to get this data? Well, they could also run a report and then export that report to Excel. And then from Excel, they can manipulate the data to kind of get all this information. But this takes time. And the club doesn't have that much time to be spending on every time they need to find out how many years so-and-so has donated. So we can easily go ahead and create a customizable rollup. And to do that, pretty straightforward. It's 3 easy steps. Step 1 is just to create the field that this data will be going into. And so in our case, we created a years donated on the account record. And then we need to actually create a filter group. And so this is going to tell us which type of opportunities do we want, because we don't want them all. We only want certain opportunities. We don't want all the lost or all the pledges, just as an example. And so the filter group we're using is actually one out of the box, so it's super convenient for us. But just to go over it very quickly, we just chose the opportunity. We want to make sure that the amount is not blank, obviously. And then we want to make sure that that opportunity is actually 1, so that we're not calculating when donations are just pledged or if they're closed loss, just as an example. And then the last step is to actually create that rollup. So pretty straightforward. It's going to ask us for a few things. To start, we need an object. In our case, it's the account. Then we need our field. So we made our years donated field already, so we're good to go. We could go ahead and fill in a quick description. In our case, just rollup of years donated. Now we need our operation. And in our operation, we have a few different values. We have sum, we have average, the minimum, the maximum. And so these will all relate to things regarding currency fields. But there's also an operation called years donated, very convenient for our case. And this will actually tell you every single year that someone has donated. And this is exactly what we want. So we're going to go ahead and select the years donated field. Then we need to select our rollup type. So we're just going to go ahead and just do account with hard credits. I'm going to go ahead and select our filter group as well. And then lastly, we're going to need to choose our date fields. In our case, we're going to use the close date. It's usually a good one, but this you can use any date field that is on the opportunity. And then because we use the years donated, there's no actual amount field. But if we use the operations such as sum or average, they'll also ask for which currency field we'll like to use. And in most cases, you'd want to use the native amount field, but you can use any currency field on the opportunity. So once this is all said and done, we could go ahead and save it and we can activate it and it will be ready to go. But our data won't actually update by itself. We'll kind of have to push it, just like we did with the household naming conventions and the opportunity naming conventions. So we're actually going to go back into the bulk data processes, and we're going to go ahead and run the rollup donations batch. And this will just recalculate all of those rollups for us. And so now this way, once we click on that, it'll update our years donated field with all of the years donated for each account. So moving on to something else that will make the club's life a little bit easier is using enhanced recurring donations. So currently, NPSP has the legacy recurring donations enabled, and it can get a little messy. So the club has noticed that they have a lot of donations that are marked as pledged, but the close dates were in the past. So they're not really maintaining the recurring donations as much as they should be. And this is a little bit of an issue. So if they enable the enhanced recurring donation, this will change a lot of the things and it'll make their life a lot easier. right off the bat, instead of creating a bunch of different opportunities at once that the legacy version did, the enhanced version only creates one donation at a time. So now instead of having to deal with up to like 12 recurring donations, we only have to deal with the one. And it will only create a second one once we mark the first one as closed, which I think is a lot easier to deal with. Also, we have this new little widget on the side that tells us the actual current schedule. It will show us any past schedules that they've had, and it'll even show us all of the upcoming installments for this recurring donation. So this makes working with recurring donations a lot simpler than having to go through each individual opportunity and going through them all. So we talked about recurring donations. Let's talk about inputting new donations. So the club find it a little bit tedious when they have to input new donations into their Salesforce. They think it's a little time consuming to create a new contact, a new account, and then a new donation. That's 3 potential screens they have to go through just to create a single record. So luckily, NPSP has a native solution for this as well, and that is the gift entry. So with gift entry, you can create a contact, an organization, as well as an opportunity, all from one screen. And the best part is that you can actually make your own templates. So you can actually select only the fields that you think is essential for this donation. Just as a quick example, if we have a contact, when you actually create a new contact, you'll have all those fields there. You'll have like the birthday, you'll have their preferred phone number, you'll have their work phone number, their house phone number. We don't need all that stuff when we're just trying to put in a donation. So in this case, we only need to put in the fields that we need. So the contact's first name, the last name, you just put the one email, one phone number, maybe their address, that's it. That's all we need. Also, something that's really cool is that when we create a batch, we can actually set defaults for that batch. So that way, if you're only doing batches for, let's say, donations that were created today, you can set the close date default as today. So that's one less field that you have to fill out when you are inputting your data. So using gift entry, it keeps your data very organized, keeps you save a bunch of time as well. And probably one of my favorite parts is that it only creates the contacts, the accounts, and the opportunities when you say so. And that's when you process the batch. So you can actually input all of these things. And if you're not ready to create all these records yet, you don't have to. Once you process the batch, they'll all be created all at once, which I think is super convenient and super useful for organizations such as the club. So what have we done to help the club out? Well, we standardized their household naming conventions as well as their opportunity naming conventions. So now they can easily see all of the important data right off the bat without having to click into an individual record to get that important information. Secondly, we try to keep things a little simple, try to get a minimal viable solution for the club. They weren't using the payments, so we disabled it. They were having a lot of issues with extra addresses being created when they make little changes. So we turned off the automatic address creation, but we still left address management for them so that they can still utilize that functionality of NPSP. And we also made their life a little bit easier. We enabled that new customizable rollup that they wanted and they needed. We enabled enhanced recurring donations. So now they don't have to deal with all these little extra donations. And then we enabled gift entry so they can easily put the data that they need and they want for a donation right off the bat. So overall, we saved the club a bunch of time so they could spend less time fiddling around with their Salesforce and more time spent trying to further their mission. Thank you, everybody, for attending my session, and thank you very much to our sponsors. And thank you very much to the organizers for having me out here. I hope you guys learned a thing or two about NPSP and how, and hopefully you can actually use some of these things to help your organizations out. So thanks a lot, guys.